Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel. My name is Maludi Gracia, an NX Unite team member at Nexus Marketing, and your moderator for today's panel. Today's panel topic is Money Matters, Financial Management for the Modern Nonprofit. And as usual, before I introduce today's panelists and we jump into this fascinating topic, I do have some quick logistics to cover. NX Unite by Nexus Marketing serves as a powerful community resource designed to foster connections and facilitate lasting relationships within the mission-driven sector. On NX Unite, you can find upcoming industry events, suggested influencers to follow, trusted solutions, and cost-driven podcasts. NX Unite also hosts webinars, demos, and of course, panels with experts such as these lovely folks with me here today. Today's hour-long panel will include time both for questions curated by my team and questions from you all, our fantastic audience. So at any time during the panel, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and we'll spend the second half of the panel addressing as many as we possibly can. Now, if you're having any technical difficulties or have any logistics questions, my team member Anton is backstage under the Team NX Unite username, ready to assist you the best he can. I also wanted to share that this panel is being recorded. So for those of you watching live, the recording will be sent to you via DM in the NX Unite community platform within the hour after we wrap up. People can also continue to access the recording after the panel in the event recording library. Finally, before I introduce today's panelists, I want to thank you all for attending this panel. Whether you're attending live or watching the recording, we're very excited to be in touch with you, the mission-driven community. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today to learn from these outstanding experts who I will now finally introduce. I'd like to first introduce Cyrus Kazi, who is the CEO and co-founder at Quantibly. He's a visionary leader at the intersection of technology and social impact, known for pioneering initiatives that bridge diverse communities. With almost 25 years of experience in tech innovation, Kazi has championed projects fostering inclusivity and accessibility in digital spaces. Cyrus, thanks for joining us. Also with us is Catherine Earhart, who is a partner and co-founder at Fairlight Advisors. Shakespeare is her passion, and before she set out to become a literature professor, her mentors encouraged her to join the workforce to gain experience. That's where she found a new passion for educating people about investments, the stock market, and financial planning. She followed that career trajectory for 25 years and now continues through founding Fairlight, where she helps nonprofits, foundations, and endowments invest to achieve their mission. Catherine, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Malu, and good morning to everyone.
And finally, with us is Lucas Lachance, who is the practice growth partner at Lane Gorman Trubit, one of the largest certified public accounting firms headquartered in the Southwest. Lucas has 2 decades of leadership in assurance, consulting, risk management, and mitigation, and taxation services. Lucas, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and glad to be here.
All right, now it's finally time to hear from our panelists. And Catherine, I'll have you start us off with the first question. What are some essential financial management practices that every modern nonprofit should implement to ensure fiscal responsibility and sustainability?
So thanks, Malu. I think one of the most important things that I feel strongly about is having an operating reserve. And with that, having an operating reserve policy as well as, if the organization has investments, having an investment policy, and being able to have the board and especially the finance committee involved with the staff in continually updating those policies, because sometimes they can get a bit out of date. I think one example of where we saw how important an operating reserve was during COVID. And a number of organizations that I spoke to were really running very lean month to month sort of expenses. And when COVID hit, mail was delayed, services were delayed, and it took a little while for those, COVID pandemic relief funds to come in. And the organizations that had an operating reserve were able to rely on that during that time, but others were, struggling. Some had to downsize, some had to pause operations while they figured some things out. So I think, those are a couple of things that I look at as critical when I'm coming in to help an organization sort of build that financial resiliency that we all want to see, especially as donors.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for starting us off, Catherine. Lucas, over to you. What are the essential financial management practices that every modern nonprofit should implement?
I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot of repetition between all three of us on the panel today. Several of my points revolve around technology, so I'm really excited to hear what Cyrus has to say. And of course, Catherine has already touched on a couple of things that I'm going to address too. In addition to the operating reserves, which I think is also critical, something I would really encourage most not-for-profits to do is have a budget and a forecast. Operate under a set of assumptions, which, like Catherine said, we found was so critical during the pandemic. But having a budget and then revisiting that budget on a periodic basis, not just crafting it and putting it on a shelf somewhere, but actually using that document as a guiding document for how the organization operates. Related to that, you're going to find some very key important controls, which I think also feed into the internal control environment for a not-for-profit. And that is taking a look at your budget to actual performance. So you craft a budget based on a series of assumptions, but then how do your assumptions really hold true to what happens in the market? So a budget to actual analysis, and then also a comparison of where you are in the current year against the prior year performance at the same time. Most not-for-profits, I would venture to say, have some sort of component of their budget that is cyclical, whether fundraising revolves around one significant event, or for example, we worked with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and during the summer, they had a lot of their fundraisers where they would, the fundraiser was Walk Like Mad. So that's when they had a lot of their walks, and a lot of their donations came in through the summertime. So comparing summer performance in one year versus prior performance in another year is going to be a critical component to seeing how you're performing. I would also add in there, make sure that the management team, not just the CFO or controller, understands the financials. If you're a financial professional, you kind of live and die in the statement of financial position and statement of activities. But a lot of people are called to a not-for-profit because they're drawn to the mission. And that passion brings them to the organization, which is great, but not everybody brings also that same skill set. So make sure that everybody understands the financials at the appropriate level, and share that information with the staff at a level that's also appropriate.
Wonderful. Thanks, Luke. All right, Cyrus, final thoughts on essential financial management practices to implement.
Thanks, Malu. It's hard to add after what Catherine and Lucas said. So whenever we work with not-for-profits and NGOs, I always use this line, and I say there are 3 P's of financial management: planning, policies, and practice. So first, plan, which is through budget and align your budget to your strategic goals. Develop the financial policies and procedures based on where you are now, and also have a forecasting view of which policies you might need a little down the path, because regulations are changing, funding streams are changing, and the last part is the practice part. I personally don't think that the top-down budgeting approach is effective. So involve all the stakeholders that need to be involved in your planning process. Make that as part of the financial literacy, as Luke rightly pointed out, within the organization, so everyone has a visibility into the specific compliance aspect, specific planning aspect, and most importantly, where they're going with this money. I think these three things can keep you transparent, make you accountable, both internally and externally. And this is how you can almost real time plan for sustainability, for your financial sustainability. And as my other panelists mentioned, during the pandemic, this became an absolutely essential tool for all organizations to almost survive on a month-to-month basis. So.
Thanks, Cyrus. All right, we're off to a great start. And Luke, I'll have you start us off with the next question. In today's data-driven world, how can nonprofits leverage financial data and analytics to make informed decisions that drive organizational growth and impact?
I have a couple of points that I'm going to raise, but honestly, I really am very anxious to hear what Cyrus has to say on this topic and another couple other ones that are coming up. As far as how not-for-profits utilize data, there are a couple of key metrics that most not-for-profits watch. Watchdog organizations like to see that a majority of the amount that is contributed to a not-for-profit organization is used in ways that sustain the programs of the not-for-profit. So most watchdogs are looking at your programmatic expenses as a percentage of your total expenses, as well as how much money that you spend in fundraising and then how much money you spend for management in general. And those three key ratios are going to vary from subsector to subsector of not-for-profit, but like it or not, they have emerged as three key data points that most savvy donors are at least monitoring when they're giving funds to an organization. Within a particular not-for-profit, I would say also pay attention to the profitability of specific programs. Know whether or not your fundraising dollars that you're spending really are generating a multiple in return. And then whether or not the programs that you really want to fund truly are not sinking the not-for-profit. And then there are a couple other data points that don't necessarily have to be financial, but I think that they're important metrics. And I point to things like maybe as part of a particular grant agreement, you have to serve a certain number of constituents in your community. You may get a federal grant that says you can spend this on housing for veterans, but you've got to serve 8,000 veterans in a quarter. Well, that's a non-financial key metric that you're going to have to monitor. So something like that comes up in grant agreements all the time. And another key component for not-for-profits is monitoring your volunteer hours. Even though there's no specific reflection for that in the financial statements themselves, that is a huge piece of marketing for your organization. So it's not only just the nuts and bolts of the accounting piece, but what are some of the other key performance indicators that are relevant to your organization?
Such great points. Thanks, Luke. All right, Cyrus, how can nonprofits leverage financial data and analytics to make informed decisions?
I'm sure Luke has our internal memos because he touched upon every single point I was going to make. I'm going to share some observations about, when we work with not-for-profits, and for context, we work with nonprofits, NGOs in 82 countries. So we get a wide range of financial data and non-financial data. And one of the first things we ask not-for-profits to do is that whenever you're going to, first of all, make your decisions data-driven. In this day and age, if you are operating a not-for-profit or an NGO and not leveraging data, you're falling behind, period. And so, in whatever shape and form that takes, you don't necessarily have to have the best technology. You can even use the data in your spreadsheet and, still make informed decisions. And you can talk to experts like my panelists who can help you become more data literate in that sense. In terms of financial management data, one of the things that we ask our nonprofit NGO clients is to tie the financial and the non-financial to the dollar amount, because that is your impact thesis, that is your impact reporting. Whenever you're talking to donors, current and potential, you need to be able to show that this is the return, as Luke rightly pointed out, but also this is the non-financial return of this investment. So that's one thing. This also helps you with the resource planning internally. I mean, I'm sure my panelists and all the audiences can agree there are organizations who are not necessarily cost effective when it comes to their operations. So use the financial data to become operationally efficient, because it will help with your impact, with your transparency, and use financial data for kind of like a risk management planning. What are your risk factors, from regulatory compliance to fundraising shortfalls to budget gaps or anything else? Just having that view, using the information in your spreadsheet or your financial management system, that will actually be highly effective in your decision-making process.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Cyrus. All right, Catherine, what would you like to add in how to make informed decisions using financial data and analytics?
Well, my fellow panelists have been great at really outlining the major issues, so I'm going to supplement. One thing I will add, as a volunteer, I wasn't on the board, but I was fundraising for a nonprofit about 10 years ago that closed its doors suddenly, and I was shocked and didn't see that coming. And I think that really led me to being incredibly passionate about how could we prevent this from happening to other nonprofits. One thing that became clear was it wasn't any one issue. It was a series of sort of medium risk issues that when they start happening, two happen together, suddenly they snowball and become big issues. So one of the things that we've done at Fairlight is we have distilled, just after working with a number of organizations over the years, we've distilled it down to kind of 5 areas that you can, really measure and track sort of leading indicators as well as lagging indicators. So, one of the areas is around people. How resilient is your nonprofit when it comes to people? You can track things like turnover, right? But it could be the turnover is too low. Too many people have been around for too long, and therefore there's this institutional knowledge, should they retire or leave, that the organization will struggle. And then if there's too high a turnover. Another area is revenue / financials, right? Looking at the diversity of your fundraising sources, looking at your ability to, fundraise over, several years. And if you can start to catch things as they're in the sort of yellow before they get to red, that would be a good, way to track. There's also facilities. So whether you rent or you own your building, but what are the comps around the area? What are you paying under market, over market? Can you be strategic about how you handle that fixed costs? Programs / operations. So really looking at some of the metrics of your programs, and Cyrus really touched on that already. And then there's technology. So more and more we're seeing a lot of breaches, as well as cybercrime when it comes to these cyber criminals really being able to lurk around in your nonprofit systems for, they say the average time is 18 months. So they really get to know your habits and how you deal with money. And so being able to track these various risks from a data and analytics perspective is massively helpful when it comes to really building that long-term resilience that donors and board members want to see. Back to you,
Wonderful.
Malou.
Thank you so much, Catherine. All right. Very quickly, I'd like to remind our live audience, if you have any questions for our panelists, now would be the perfect time to drop them in the chat so we can address the topics that are relevant to you and your team. All right, here's our next question. And Cyrus, I'll have you start us off with this one. What do you see as the role of technology and digital tools in enhancing financial management processes within the nonprofit organization?
Thank you. It's going to sound ironic if I say this, but technology is not going to solve all your problems unless you have set up policies and procedures and the culture of using technology. They're just tools. So the over-reliance on software and thinking that software is going to fix all the problems in terms of your financial management or operation or governance, that is not a pragmatic way to approach technology. And of course, and there are many tools available. Automation, for example, from a financial management perspective, expense processing, reconciliation, those tools are available for automation, right? I would say that the role of technology has drastically changed with the advent of AI and machine learning. But that's a much bigger lecture on this. But I want to say another trend that we are noticing is that just a few years ago, we used to see standalone financial platforms, solutions, for budgeting, for accounting, for fund management and forecasting. But that standalone process is changing. There is a demand for integrated approach to see, here is the dollar coming in. This is how we're managing that information, or the money going in and out. And this is what is tying to programs and services and activities and so on and so forth. So it is not just dollar for dollar accounting part. It is also the non-financial aspects are being tied with those dollars. So integration with other solutions to have a comprehensive view is where the technology is kind of evolving. I urge all not-for-profits, NGOs, to invest in security and compliance. And these days, the security compliance tools, I know those are big words, scary words, but Catherine is spot on. So many breaches happen, and a lot of times because of human error, someone left the computer open and suddenly your PII or PHI, if you're dealing with it, is exposed, and you're being fined and all of that stuff. Simple technology tools can secure your financial data. Just encrypting your payroll data or your budgets and accounting data is not enough. There are other financial implications if you don't secure across the board. So invest in technology, invest in security and compliance, and this is how I kind of see the role of technology evolving in the nonprofit sector at this moment.
Thanks, Cyrus. All right, Catherine, thoughts on the role of technology and digital tools?
I would just echo what Cyrus said. It's really, you can have the best systems in the world and just not have processes, and you don't really have much. I had a long time ago, a boss said to me, you can have the best people, most experienced people, and have poor processes, and you get mediocre results. If you have really good processes, really good systems, and you have inexperienced people, you can get great results. And so I thought a lot about that over the years, and I think he's very right. I think one thing that we've seen clients with sort of mediocre systems, and some are still using Excel, but at least they're monitoring and reviewing it on a very regular basis. Whereas other organizations have QuickBooks, or they're using Intact or one of those systems, and yet they have somebody overseeing it who just doesn't really understand the systems. I think Luke had mentioned, like, you need somebody who really kind of knows how to understand the balance sheets and the budget to actuals, how to interpret that, and you really need people on your board that can support you with that. So I think back to what my panelists were saying is the technology is important, but first get the processes in place.
Thanks, Catherine. All right, Luke, we want to hear from you as well. What's the role of tech and digital tools?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and pick up on a couple of threads that Cyrus started with. Technology is definitely not my area of expertise, and like you said, when you get into the realm of AI, you could do whole presentations just on that. But I do think that harnessing some of that technology that's available through some of the large language modules like ChatGPT or Jasper, those are tools that are at this stage relatively easy to get into, but they can really streamline how an organization reaches out to their donors, how an organization can improve specific targeted marketing so that the message that you're sending about your organization resonates with potential donors and with your existing donors on a personal level, because these learning language modules like ChatGPT are able to refine your marketing in a way that allows you to really target those specific donors. And it tailors the message right down to the donor level. I looked at this question in terms of, if I'm at a not-for-profit now, what are some things that I can use as takeaways? And so there are generative AI tools that can record your board meeting and your committee meetings and turn around and generate minutes for you out of those recordings. And then all you have to do as the person who's responsible, all I have to do is just review those and make sure that the phrasing makes sense and that it really is exactly truly what happened. But I look at that as a big time saver for an organization when you can utilize some rudimentary AI tools right now. Similarly, you can also put together an outline. If you're an executive director, for example, or a finance manager, CFO, you can put together an outline of significant data points and feed it into generative AI programs, and it will in turn, for lack of a better phrase, spit out your presentation, including things like infographics that make it a lot easier to communicate financial information to, let's call them, non-financial people that may be on the board. So I tried to approach this question specifically with, what are things that we can be doing now that will save an organization time or generate revenue or generate contributions in a way that's more meaningful? And so, but it's like Cyrus said, I mean, you could do hours and hours just on the advent of AI and what we have right now as a set of tools in the toolbox.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Luke. All right, Catherine, here's our next question. How can nonprofits strategically approach financial management, particularly in times of economic uncertainty?
I think one of the key things we saw during especially COVID was the ability for organizations to pivot quickly and to be creative. So I think you saw this with a lot of events and the financial aspect around events. A lot of organizations went online and had their events online, or they shortened their financial output with respect to that event, or they scrapped it all together and thought of different ways to engage their community. And I think what we've learned from that process is that organizations are rethinking, how do we engage donors? How do we start to think about the process that we go through to raise funds? What's the most optimal process? I know from speaking to a lot of fundraisers that the highest ROI is on planned giving. Planned giving takes a long time to implement, and it definitely has its pluses and minuses when it comes to the amount of groundwork that you need to lay. But I think what I've seen from my client base is folks are starting to really think about, what are different ways to do things? How are we engaging that next generation? I think the most recent philanthropy report came out showing how, millennials and Gen Z are approaching philanthropy. It's in a different way, and they're also giving to different sectors of nonprofit than previous generations. And so how do organizations stay in front of that and make sure that they're reaching out to their donor base in a new and innovative way? And I think that really impacts the financials, because obviously, it's the revenue piece that you're continually looking at. You can cut expenses only so much. And I'm hugely passionate about making sure, to the extent possible, that we can encourage donors to give in an unrestricted manner, because nonprofits really know the way that they could use the funds best. And I think we're starting to see some trends in that direction, a loosening up, if you will, from foundations, from the grant application process, as well as some pretty high profile donors have been giving large unrestricted gifts without any kind of need for an onerous application. The stats are showing that the process to reach out for funds is getting a bit easier. So those are some I think interesting trends that I'm seeing so far.
Thanks, Catherine. All right, Luke, any tips on how to strategically approach financial management?
I have 4 bullet points for this question, and Catherine hit 3 of them. So I'm going to add a little bit of context around those. My first one is really kind of cliche, and that is plan for the unexpected. You can build the best budget. You can think that you've nailed down all the appropriate assumptions, but the bottom line is the market's going to change. The pandemic's going to arrive. Something significant is going to happen. But being nimble, and I love the phrasing that Catherine used, but being nimble as an organization, whether it's pivoting on your special event or just having to approach things in a different way is important. Picking up on also Catherine's thread from the very first question about an operating reserve, I would say that would go hand in hand with any other type of board designated reserve, particularly as you're thinking about major expenditures, whether it's it's a capital expenditure of some sort that you feel you're going to need, or it's just even creating a rainy day fund. But having board designated funds that align with what we anticipate are going to be issues for the organization in the short and long term. I thought that I was going to be the first one to mention plan giving, but no, having a plan giving program is a significant way that you can help sustain organizations when times are lean. And I loved Catherine's point too about cultivating a broader donor base. On that particular one, I took a different approach with it in that if you have this is always such a significant risk to an organization. If you've got 10 to 15 really significant donors that are consistently giving money, that's great. It's great that you can cultivate that type of relationship with them. But donors don't live forever. And who's to say that generation 2 is going to feel just as strongly as generation 1 did about giving to that particular organization? So cultivating a broader donor base is a significant piece, I feel, toward risk mitigation.
Thanks, Luke. All right, Cyrus, final thoughts and approaches to financial management in times of economic uncertainty.
As I said before, it's hard to add after what Catherine and Luke said. I am a recovering management consultant. So when I was consulting with nonprofits, NGOs, philanthropic organizations, one of the things that we always incorporated in the financial analysis is what is known as PESTEL analysis, PESTEL. If you're not familiar with it, it's political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. PESTEL or PESTLE, depending on who you ask. This is the same thing. It is essentially looking at all the external factors that can impact your business, your not-for-profit, your finances, your people, all of it. And having that honest conversation to say this regulation or this technology or this change in demographic or this change in donor attitude can significantly impact X, Y, and Z within your business. And that I think should be an essential exercise for any financial management for rainy days. That's just my opinion. I am also of the opinion that building reserve is a good thing. It's a great thing for not-for-profits. But I see a change in the perpetual grant giving and grant making and grant taking culture. I see a lot of not-for-profits are finding revenue streams, that they can, in the event grant dollars die out or government contracts die out, they can rely on that kind of earned income, if you will. That has actually sustained many not-for-profits during the pandemic. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to mine Bitcoin in your basement. There's lots of tools available to you to generate some revenue. At least, any financial, not-for-profit financial advisor will tell you at least 10 to 20% should be your own income. And the last thing I want to say is that always have a plan to go lean in times of emergency. So for example, when the lockdown happened, we were working with thousands of organizations around the world, and immediately we realized that they're all collaborating to minimize their costs but maximize the delivery of services. When you're collaborating with other not-for-profits, other community partners, NGOs, government agencies, and what have you, the cost is shared, the resources are shared, and everyone has a shared responsibility. So this is how you can plan ahead that in the event X happens, we can flip the switch, break glass and flip the switch and say, okay, let's partner up, let's distribute the cost. So these are some of the strategic things that I can think of for not-for-profits.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cyrus. All right. This is the last of my questions before I open it up to our wonderful audience. So, this would be a great time to get those questions in so we can address as many as we possibly can. But before I open that door, I want to sneak in my next question. And Luke, I'll have you start us off with this one. Nonprofit financial management often involves navigating complex regulatory requirements and compliance standards. What are some common challenges nonprofits face in this regard, and how can they proactively address any issues?
Well, compliance standards, because the 990 tax return's real sexy, but it's part of what you have to do for running an organization. My thought on this is we've touched on it a couple different places in terms of policies, but I think annually you should at least annually be conducting board training. I feel that an organization and the board should be aware and have that refreshed on a periodic basis about what their fiduciary responsibilities really are. Also, periodically revise your internal policies to adapt to a changing environment. Like, for example, have you considered whether or not your organization actually wants to take Bitcoin or cryptocurrency? And if you've decided that that's an acceptable contribution you'd like to make, have you reflected what that impact is going to be in your internal financial policies? So I think making sure that you're aware of what's going on in the legal environment, for starters, and that comes with having a good set of advisors, but also understanding that the policies that govern the organization aren't something that needs to be drafted once and put on a shelf and then you don't pick them up again. Those really are the governing documents on how the organization should operate. And so periodically refreshing yourself as part of the management team and especially the board, I think, are two critical pieces on how you remain compliant. Oh, wait, I have one more.
Yeah.
One more, sorry. Keeping current on industry standards through events like this one that Nexus is hosting, but finding ways to keep current on things that are developing in the industry as well. What are the changing financial reporting requirements? What are the changing tax requirements? So finding that type of resource available in your community is important too.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Luke. All right, Catherine, what are some common challenges in terms of regulatory requirements and compliance standards and how to address these?
One thing that I've noticed is, and these are just kind of simple things, but whenever we're onboarding a new client, I do go to the state, filing of information department. So in California, I'm located in California, it would be the California State Business Bureau, I think it's called. And I check that they're up to date on their filings. Any nonprofit client is up to date on their filings. And actually I've caught it that a couple of times they're overdue. So it's one of those things that can really trip you up if you forget to file something. And I've seen this happen when there's a transition in leadership, especially for smaller nonprofits. So if you could create a checklist of just important documents and their due dates and have that accessible to everyone in the organization, including board members, so that those things are, just checked off each time. The other area that I think is really important is when it comes to restricted funds, specifically endowments, is, you should be following up MIFA. So it's the Uniform Prudent Institutional Managers Funds Act. And, most states have adopted that or modified it to a certain extent. But, really the number one thing within that is honoring donor intent. So if you have a large gift that came to your organization and it was restricted, making sure that the donor agreement is filed and you have it accessible, because if there's some reason the organization shifts gears or something changes and the gift is suddenly not being used with original intent, you have a problem. So I think, there have been some high profile lawsuits where donors have unfortunately had to retract a gift because the organization did not use it according to its intent. So I think that's a really major area that organizations should focus on.
Thanks for sharing, Catherine. All right, Cyrus, what would you like to add to common challenges?
Thank you, Malu. I don't believe that compliance should be siloed. It should never be siloed. It is a mindset in your operation. It should be shared across the board, and everyone from the receptionist to the board chair has a responsibility towards making sure that your organization is compliant. And so when I say this, that means that the financial compliance part is related to the tech compliance part, related to HR compliance, and so corporate compliance, and so on and so forth. They're not isolated. As Catherine rightly pointed out, creating a compliance roadmap, even in a simple spreadsheet, is a good starting point. Even if you're a small organization and you may think that you don't have a lot of compliance requirements, filing requirements, and so on and so forth, you'd be surprised that actually you do. California not-for-profits I often talk to, they're just starting out, and suddenly we are having conversations with them about data and privacy, or protecting children's information, or PHI, because California has a unique set of laws. So having that bird's eye view of your compliance roadmap and building it out as you grow, and make that part of your financial management process, that, okay, this is where we are. These are the policies that we need to adhere to right now, and this is where we are going to be in a year or so. This is what we need to build. Plan giving, endowment, managing how to manage the donor funds, and also making sure you have a conflict of interest and gifts received policy, and all of those. These are part of that compliance process. The second thing I want to mention is that, of course, talk to legal experts and accounting experts, such as Catherine and Luke. Train everyone. It's not just a checkbox. Quite literally, just train everyone from board to the frontline staff, that they also have a role to play in terms of compliance. And at the beginning of this panel, I talked about planning. So create policies, procedures, and routinely review, audit them if those policies, procedures need to be updated, if they're compliant, and if it is actually helping your organization, or just creating unnecessary bureaucratic processes. So these are some of the ways I see not-for-profits should utilize compliance.
Thanks, Cyrus. All right, we're officially opening our Q&A portion, and we have a question here from Barry. And Cyrus, I'll have you start us off with this one. It was mentioned that there's a trend toward integration of accounting, team budgeting, and nonprofit financial impact tracking. Are there any solutions that are doing that? And ideally, with nonprofits in mind, and any that small nonprofits or smaller, under 1 million organizations could implement. Any thoughts on that, Cyrus?
Oh, this is going to sound very self-promoting, and I apologize beforehand. Please, Barry, feel free to reach out to me after the panel. I don't want to continuously plug in my platform, but we are one of the very few platforms that has actually done exactly that. And we're the first platform to operationalize impact with fundraising and finance and governance and so on and so forth. I'm happy to talk to you. We work with small organizations with 5 people to the world's largest NGO. So Barry, please reach out. Happy to talk to you afterwards.
Thanks, Cyrus. Anyone else want to answer that question? Luke and Catherine?
Cyrus should have made it a commercial. I mean, that question was tailor-made.
Catherine, anything you want to add?
Malu, I probably think Cyrus is the best person to answer that, but I think it doesn't have to necessarily be a super sophisticated system, especially if you're under $1 million. So, hiring a consultant, going through, I think the Council on Foundations, I'll pop in a blog about risk management as we see it, and that might be able to help sort of the integration aspect of it.
Wonderful. That would be helpful. Thanks, Catherine. All right, here's our next question. And Luke, I'll have you start us off with this one. How can we effectively engage our board members in overseeing and contributing to our nonprofit's financial sustainability?
Oh, one of the age-old questions. I think it starts honestly with the board recruitment process. I think generally it breaks down into two categories where you either are a working board, which is most often common in startups and small to medium-sized not-for-profits, or you are an oversight board, which tends to be where you would find like the larger organizations have a board that's really there for oversight, and the work is really done at the committee level. Selecting the right people for your board is a tricky question. Early on, when a not-for-profit is starting up, it's often the founder themselves, and then anybody else that, a friend or family that also shares a passion for that particular mission. And so I think it starts there. But then you have to recruit people that also round out the skill set that you need for a board. So you want somebody from the onset. You need to tell them, I feel this is a working board. Here's the time commitment we're expecting. We'd like to have an attorney on the board, or we'd like to have an investment advisor on the board. But telling people up front what the anticipated commitment is going to be helpful in kind of determining whether or not that'd be a good fit.
Wonderful. Thanks, Luke. Anyone else want to add to that?
Sure, I'll just add a quick note that I think board engagement is a huge, so you've got board training, which is one part of the engagement piece, but I think also engaging your board. I've noticed a lot of boards are going to virtual meetings, which is great because you may not have to drive 45 minutes or, leave your house for the evening. You can have dinner and then hop on your board meeting. But it's also leading to less engagement among each other and with the organization, because I think, you have a tendency to sit there and look at everyone on your little box at Zoom, maybe daydream a little, and you're not really engaging with the organization. So I think if your organization is still going to have the board meetings remain virtual, how can you actually have some activities where you're having some really personal one-to-one engagement? Maybe you bring in a speaker and you do an exercise so that your board members take away a little something that for themselves, because we need to have a little bit of give and take on the organization. So I think feeling like a board member's feeling appreciated, even if it's something small like a training or a guest speaker on a topic that everybody that's relevant to the organization and that the board members care about.
Thanks, Catherine. All right, we have a follow-up question here from Barry. Let's see. On the planned giving front, what are the first 3 steps for an organization that does not have a program in place? Anyone want to answer that question? Otherwise, we'll have to just move on. Yeah,
I keep
Catherine?
Catherine's going to do it, but I would start off, I think first, and this is where data becomes important. I think if you're looking at a planned giving program or starting one up, the first thing to do would be determine who are your biggest donors, your donors that have the longest history with the organization. It's a combination of who gives a lot and who's been giving a lot. And then meeting with those donors one-on-one to talk with them about, or either that, or having a focus group with those donors to talk about how the direction of the organization, involving them in where we feel the organization is going, to really kind of leverage that relationship and turn it into a buy-in. And so I feel that once the donors have an understanding of where you're going as an organization, they've been committed for quite some time. It leads itself to a natural question. Have you thought about maybe doing a large gift in the future, or and paying it out over time? But I think it starts with culling through the data and determining who is that target audience that you really want to reach out to begin with.
That's a great point. Thanks, Luke. Catherine, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, sort of the first 3 steps I would look at is, first of all, I would actually have a plan giving consultant, and there's some that are out there that will do just a consultation at no cost. So having just a conversation with them, is my organization ready for that kind of activity. The other thought is there is we have one in Northern California. There's a National Association for Plan Giving. And in Northern California, it's called the Northern California Plan Giving Council. They actually offer a series of classes on plan giving. So if there's an organization that's new to it, you have the resource to dedicate to having somebody trained in that direction. I would certainly start there. And, before I really dove into it, I would get an assessment as to whether the organization's ready or not. You can definitely update your website to have links to all the ways that people can give from a planned gift. So if you have a relationship with a local community foundation and and that community foundation is able to accept or manage charitable remainder trusts or other kind of plan giving tools that would then ultimately be a gift to you. Those are some resources that you can start to check out if you want to go in the direction of plan giving.
Thank you so much for sharing, Catherine. All right, unbelievably, the hour has gone by so quickly, so we're going to wrap up this portion of the panel so we can stick to our schedule. Now, if you have more questions for our panelists, please complete the survey that will be dropped in the chat to indicate which panelists you have questions for, and we'll make sure to connect you with them after the session. I've had such a wonderful time hearing from our panelists today, and I'm hoping to get one final piece of insight from them all. And Cyrus, I'll have you start us off with this question. What do you see as the future of nonprofit financial management, and how can nonprofits get ahead today?
Thank you for that question. Digital transformation. Everyone is, heading towards that. I see the future of nonprofit financial management is going to be reliant on a lot of automation, and as I mentioned, AI is taking a big role in it. From automating grant writing to financial reporting to coming up with real-time analytics and tracking KPIs. All of these are related. So I would say that as a not-for-profit, you can make minimal investment and have that insights into some automation and some analytics that is necessary for your day-to-day operations. Enhance financial transparency and accountability. In a previous panel, I mentioned that since 2020, the public trust in not-for-profits have decreased from 59% to 56%, primarily because of lack of transparency in their finances. And the new generation of philanthropic investors, impact investors, donors that are coming on board, if they don't see financial transparency and accountability, they are not interested in funding your project or funding your cause. So these are the two takeaways I would always tell every not-for-profit or NGO. Invest in data-driven decision-making and really enhance your transparency and accountability.
Thanks, Cyrus. All right, Catherine, what is the future of nonprofit financial management and how to get ahead today?
One thing we're seeing, Malou, is, again, I mentioned this earlier, but this trend towards unrestricted giving by either major donors or even smaller individual donors. And I think we're starting to see the pendulum swing the other way. To Cyrus's point, there is this lack of trust because of the transparency issue. But where organizations are transparent and they are upfront about their financial resilience and they ask for the gift to be unrestricted, we've seen tremendous success in that arena and organizations being able to shore up their financials and really to fulfill their philanthropic mission because they have these additional funds that allow them to do some expansion or do some innovative things. So I think being able to, start either a board designated fund, an endowment, or shoring up your operating reserves, that's something that I think I'd like to see more of, actually, is the unrestricted donation. And I believe in it myself, so I do it myself as a donor.
Wonderful. Thanks, Catherine. All right, Luke, what do you see as the future for nonprofit financial management and how to get ahead today?
I think I think it starts a lot with having the right advisors in your corner. Whether it's a financial advisor or an investment advisor or legal, marketing. If you don't have the expertise in house, you need to outsource to someone like Nexus, or human resources or IT. Um, there are so many different components that go into running an organization. Even though it's a not-for-profit, you still have to run it like a business. So cultivating those skill sets either in-house or understanding that it's something you have to outsource. But you still have to run it in a way that supports the mission and is profitable. And that's going to require having the right types of advisors around you. So find ones that share your passion for the mission, um, and go with those. But surround yourself with a team that will help guide you and the organization in the long run.
Of that. Thanks, Luke. All right. And with that, we have reached the end of our panel. And I want to give a big thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights today. I also want to give a big thank you to our audience. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope you enjoyed yourself and learned something that will benefit the work that you do on a daily basis. We have a packed few months of panels ahead of us, and I hope that you will join us for them. So keep an eye out on the NX Unite community platform or in the NX Unite LinkedIn page to make sure that you don't miss out on any of these. All right, that is it for me. It has been a pleasure speaking with you all. Thank you once again, and have a nice rest of the day, everyone. Thank you. Bye.